So in this video, we're going to be talking about the Roman world of the early Principate. One of the things that's interesting about this period is that as a sign of the flourishing of the Roman Empire as a cohesive unit, we have not just economic growth, but cultural growth. And this is described in terms of literature and art by two terms that are both comparative, and in that sense, sort of removes the focus from what is actually going on here to put it into a larger picture, which might or might not be helpful. The first is the Silver Age of Roman literature or of Latin literature. And of course, it's the Silver Age, which means that it's subordinate to the Golden Age that came before. The Golden Age is the period of Augustus, in which the giddy heights of enthusiasm and the patronage that Augustus lavishes and encourages brings about an explosion of Latin literature, most notably Virgil writing the Aeneid, but also many other works of poetry and drama and history and philosophy and so forth. So the Silver Age is a secondary period in which the tone is more muted, and the works are not as world changing, but are of remarkable interest in telling us about the Romans. Apuleius's Golden Ass and Petronius's Satyricon are both extremely evocative of the milieu of the early Principates, and not necessarily just in terms of the politics of it, but cultural expectations and the way, being Roman has shifted as a result of the accumulation of empire and wealth. A number of things affects this. One is that, as we discussed before, Tiberius and Caligula in particular, because of their paranoia and the ratcheting up of attacks upon speech that is perceived to be detrimental toward the Principate and toward the Princeps, the treason trials for Maestas. The result of this is there's a chilling effect on political satire and political oratory, even, and literature that seems to have content that touches in any way upon the Roman ruling family. And so there's less about the meaning of Roman rule, and more about the nature of Roman culture. And this is striking. There's a way in which satire shifts. Satire doesn't go away, but it shifts toward things like previous regimes, and so we have things like Seneca's The Pumpkinification of Claudius, which we saw last week, as a means of ridiculing Claudius from the standpoint of the later reign of Nero. And we see this is how we get the very caustic and negative portrayals of the early princeps from the standpoint of later regimes that we see in Tacitus and Suetonius. The second sophistic is also a comparative term. The first sophistic is the period of the Sophists in 5th century Athens, and so that's what that's describing. Of course, is the immense period of fertility in the pursuit of knowledge and creative expression that was seen in classical Athens, the pinnacle of creative expression. The second sophistic under the early Principate is talking about a lesser flourishing, but what this is focusing on is that there's not just the creation of literature, but an emphasis, a premium that's being placed on teaching, on spreading the capacity to create literature. And this is something we also see in these excerpts on educational practices. During this period, there's a real sense that the Romans are valuing education more than ever as something that is a necessity in order to be, this world embracing culture. It is vital to be Roman that is educated. It is vital to have an understanding not just of your immediate surroundings and your own personal heritage and ancestry. The meaning of this term education has expanded in this larger world. It's in this sense in particular that we see the that this is a Greco-Roman world, that the Hellenistic East that has this cosmopolitan perspective, a, a sense that the world exists that is larger than the horizons, larger than your city walls. And that is a boon to the human ability to unlock the secrets of the physical world and of human behavior. That this is what has been absorbed by the Romans in expanding beyond its original boundaries. And so the nature of education is, to learn Greek and to learn Homer as a basis, and for this to continue to be an ongoing thing. And the anecdotes that are told here about the value of education, how it's pursued, how it's gifted, it still belongs to those who can afford it. But the impact of it and the prevalence of it becomes wider and wider as the nature of Roman culture embraces this expansion beyond the original sense of what it meant to be Roman, which was to understand Roman ways and the ancestry of your own family. In terms of how the empire is flourishing economically, there are a number of factors that go into this. First of all, the way in which the empire sort of halts its expansion as we progress, and we'll talk about this a little in the other video, means that the commerce of the empire tends to be self-contained, operating within the resources of this vast Roman world, and less involved in working in undertaking trade beyond the borders to other peoples beyond the Roman world. Um, there's an impact on the economy, a drain on the economy in terms of the cost of the standing army. Remember that the Romans, when they started out hundreds of years before, didn't have standing armies. The legions were called up as necessary for particular wars and then discharged at the end so that people could go back to their farms. This changed in the course of the expansion of Rome, and now there's this vast structure of legions and camps and so forth all throughout the Roman world. And this is a massive drain on not just the Roman treasury, but on the overall economy. It also gives back to the economy because these legions interact with local areas and are engaged not just in the purchasing of provisions, but they're a vital focal point of all these local economies. It cuts both ways, but the bottom line is that the military is this massive force within the economy with a great potential to exert negative impact. Um, there's a shift during this period toward the use of money in place of trade for the purpose of making easier things like lots of trade across distance and interaction between different kinds of people. More different kinds of trade between people who don't necessarily have things of interest to each other to exchange. And the monetization of the economy especially comes about because of this is the simplest way to deal with the paying of soldiers. monetization of the economy, the use of coinage comes about originally, out of the need to pay mercenaries, and it becomes regularized and standardized because of the need to pay the Roman legions. So we have the prevalence of Roman coins more than ever. The Romans have been using coins going back into the Republic, but now it becomes the standard means of economic exchange. Um, because of the vastness of this economy and the way in which it's flourishing, there's a higher standard of living. The Roman economy is growing during this period, and people are better off for it. But this is also something that is, because it's this closed system, there's a real potential for it to level off and become stagnant. There's also another problem which becomes more and more problematic later on. We're seeing, even in this period of growth, the underlying forces that bring about the catastrophe, the economic disaster of the third century, the period immediately after the one that we're in. And one of that is we have this closed system, and the other is that most of the wealth and the commerce is in the East. And so there's a trade disparity between the amount of commerce and industry that's going on in the East and what's going on in the West, and the result is that money and coins are moving out of the West, Italy and Gaul and Spain and North Africa, and into the East, and the coin ends up remaining there, and that imbalance eventually means that the West is poor and the East is richer, and that sets up a dynamic which is profoundly dysfunctional for the Roman Empire in later centuries. As we see, we were talking about different styles of leadership under Tiberius and Caligula and Claudius and Nero. The control over how the Roman government spends its money is entirely in terms of the personality of the princeps, and this means that the way in which the government spends money is immensely volatile, and forces that depend upon the government for the support that it provides become immensely concerned, especially whenever there's a regime change. And the largest category in which that applies is the legions. So the drain of money in the East means that the imbalance of luxury items, the imbalance of coinage, sets up a disparity between East and West. Um, the flip side of this is that there are a number of goods that are being imported from outside or from the fringes of the Roman world, most especially slaves, because the Roman Empire is more than ever dependent upon slaves to do the labor and ex-slaves to do the management of labor. And so the Roman economy is flourishing, and it's absolutely dependent upon this huge category of slaves and freedmen in order to make it work, and then the actual citizens and subjects are above this. The shift in the city of Rome is palpable, and we have this from an author who is very meticulous. And Pliny the Elder writes this natural history of the Roman world in all of its particulars, it's a fascinating read because he talks about different kinds of trees that are seen in central Italy, and talks about the way in which a particular tree had an impact upon the story of a certain general, or how a certain policy was decided upon by a chance grouping of senators who happened to be discussing something in an olive grove. And so the way in which he tells this story is a fascinating interlacing between the natural world and the humans that are living in it, and the way in which they shape each other. This particular reading talks about what Rome is like during this period, during the early Principate, and it's striking the things that he brings up. the size and population of Rome, which is immense, especially for this part of the world. Uh, the the great buildings, of course, the Circus Maximus, the Augustan Forum, the Temple of Peace, and in particular, noticing the Forum and the Circus are places of congregation. That these buildings and structures, the Rome is a city of people that come together in places like this. But he spends a lot of time talking about water movement and how the Romans have developed this elaborate system of sewers and aqueducts. But not only that, also the proliferation of wells and fountains and baths. This is indicative of something particular that the Romans are not simply living on the land and are not dependent upon nature, but have advanced to a level of controlling the elements and making it do their bidding. This is a true testament to the grandeur of Rome. That it's not simply bricks piled upon bricks, but it's an advancement in the level of humanity that the Romans have achieved. So in the provinces, what we see is a transformation in the world that the Romans have come to dominate. In other words, this is we talked a great deal about how the acquisition of empire affects the Romans. What you also want to look at is how obviously the acquisition of empire affects the people that are subjected to it. But this is still interactive. So, the first part of this is, we have a large increase in population. The economy is flourishing, the standard of living is higher, and so the humanity is growing and expanding within the Roman frontiers, and particularly urban growth. The ancient world is mostly made up of farms. Most people are farmers, and urban centers in the ancient world have always tended to be, sort of local focuses of identity, but not very many of them are very large. Very few of them are, on the scale of Babylon or Athens. Most of them are, a cluster of an urban center and a marketplace, an agora or a forum, and the buildings in which skilled laborers apply their trade, smiths and coopers and so forth. And surrounding that is much more important in a lot of ways, the agricultural lands that provide the main engine of the economy. This is the ancient world, by and large. What happens in the Roman Empire is there's a deliberate effort to cultivate the growth of cities. And this is, as a result of this, the Roman Empire is increasingly a network of urban centers, and any of them that are relatively new are, very much resemble miniature Romes. They'll have the attributes of the city of Rome in terms of architecture and design, but in terms of their economy and culture as well. Deliberate efforts to create these miniature Romes, even older cities that have been made part of the Roman world and have been, instead of being particularly planted by the Romans as colonies, usually colonies of ex-soldiers, but increasingly, migrating ordinary Romans and Italians. The older cities, pre-existing cities that have their own, ancient heritage, become municopoeia, become aspects, become, a Roman entity that combines their Romanness with their ancient heritage. And so, in these cultures, in these cities, you'll see a hybrid of Roman buildings and buildings of more ancient lineage. You'll see the interaction of different kinds of people, different ethnic groups. Alexandria is an Egyptian city founded by a Macedonian that becomes a Roman local capital, and Alexandria becomes a place of where where Roman and Greek and Egyptian and Jewish culture conflate and interact together and create a resulting complexity. All of this is a means of Romanization. All this is a way in which the Romans bring about the surging pulse of Romanness and keep it so that all of these lands are not merely with Roman overlords, but their culture, their language, their economy, their outlook is in terms of Rome, using Roman, language and ideas, and with Rome as the center of the world. And so, these cities become the drivers of economic cultural power, so much so that the increasingly the Roman economy and the Roman culture is in the provinces, and the nature of Roman social structure and the development of Roman literature and ideas is increasingly taking place in the provinces. This is the first time that we can really talk about the Roman Empire being a collective entity and not simply Rome and all other. And there's a good deal of appeal even for traditional Romans, where they can be in one of these provincial cities where they have the status of a Roman citizen that sets them above the locals. The Romans are very stingy with Roman citizenship, and so in the provinces you'll find a very small number, of actual Roman citizens with the rights and privileges of being a Roman. 99% of the people in a Roman city in the provinces will be non-citizens, will be non-Romans, and so to there's a great deal of appeal in going out to the provincial cities, having the status of Roman citizen, having the opportunities to make your fortune there, and be a part of the Roman economy away from Rome and away from all the stuff that's happening in Rome. And we see an example of this in this reading about Egypt under the Roman Empire. Strabo talks about Egypt as this sort of the Romans, think about Egypt in terms of it being this very strange and alien land. And part of this is that Egypt is kept isolated because it's very wealthy agriculturally, and so the Augustus never lets go of it and allows it to become an ordinary province. It remains a prefecture of his own house essentially. The Augustus has a very proprietary interest in Egypt, and this remains true for all of his successors. Egypt is set apart and is the personal responsibility of the princeps, and no one else can go into it or undertake business in it without his permission, because it's too dangerous as a potential platform for a rival to allow to come into anyone else's hands. But most of all, so Egypt is isolated and set apart. But it's always been for the Romans a very peculiar culture, even more so than the Greeks and the Persians. And the Romans take pride in the fact that it was badly administered under the later Ptolemies, who tended to be very dissolute and so forth, and allowed the Egypt to become likewise, and so under Roman administration, it becomes more reliable, and more better handled, and the morality and society and everything and the economy improves as a result of it. But it's still a strange place where Romans can experience peculiar alien things, like barley beer and peaches and strange fish and whaling shellfish and so forth. The Oxyrhynchus papyri is a very interesting example of a historical document because it's A lot of ancient documents, of course, do not survive. Documents tend to rot and not come down to us, and so most of them have to be copied down and survive. The Oxyrhynchus papyri, this is a bunch of papyri that was basically thrown away and buried, and so this is this little rubbish bin of things that that survived by accident, that were buried in the desert, and because it was so dry, they were dug up many years later and were mostly intact. And so we see there are grocery lists and love letters and first drafts of things, as well as parts of documents that that are known from other sources, and parts of documents that are both. The Oxyrhynchus papyrus is a great example of sort of a random find of ancient documents that people who study later periods have lots of different examples of all kinds of random information. Ancient world, most of that stuff doesn't survive. One of the things that's happening during this period is that the Roman identity is becoming so all-encompassing. The Romanness of this world is becoming standardized and seeping into every aspect, and becomes unavoidable and immutable, especially from one generation to the next. And so, by the time we're passing through the first couple centuries of the Principate, people have become immersed in this world where there is nothing but a Roman identity, no matter where you go around the Mediterranean. It's inescapable, and there's a side effect of this in that unless you thoroughly embrace enthusiastically the idea of being a part of the Roman world. And largely this happens in particular for people who have the citizenship, and have the privileges of being a legitimate Roman. For a lot of people, there's a dissonance created, and a sense of awareness that your particular identity, the identity that means most to you, is being eroded. And there are lots of different responses to this. There isn't much opportunity to rebel against the Romans militarily, and those who do are crushed, such as the Jews under Vespasian and Titus. Uh, but there are ways in which to create an alternative identity that allows you to react against the monolithic sense of Romanness around you. One of the ways in which this happens is the prevalence of local pagan religions with mysterious rites and rituals that are kept secret from everyone else. These are mystery cults, and so the prevalence of mystery cults is one of these things that shows this craving for creating an alternative identity, in rivalry with the imposition upon you of a Roman identity from outside throughout the provinces of the Roman world. Um, this is one of the reasons for which Christianity becomes more prevalent during this period, as a means of acting like a mystery cult. And for a lot of people, the Christians are very mysterious. Their rituals are strange, and there's all these anecdotal reports. Well, they drink the blood of their god and blah blah blah. But Christianity becomes this has this special appeal because it's particularly suited toward the speaking to the disenfranchised and the dispossessed. Christianity, because it offers the prospect of a better life after death. This is not something that pagan religions generally offer. Pagan religions generally talk about, this world, which is where the pagan gods are, and the afterlife is often indistinct, or in some cases a place of impotence and inability. And so, the focus in pagan religions is on the natural forces that exist in the place that you live and your interaction with those natural forces. Christianity becomes increasingly focused on what it has to offer in terms of salvation and the prospect of an eternal golden life afterwards. And so those who are not experiencing a particularly good life in this world, or whose voices and agencies are systematically put down, are find Christianity immensely appealing. And so, in particular, Christianity appeals to women, to freedmen, to people from the lower classes. But because it has a philosophical moral component, that has resonance with certain philosophies. It also has appeal in the same way as Stoicism to people of the nobility as well, especially those who, wonder about the wisdom of the way in which the Roman Empire is being run. So Christianity starts to slowly spread during this period because it has a particular appeal even beyond mystery religions. Um, and it is perceived as a threat very rapidly by the Romans because, unlike mystery religions, it is not planted in one particular place. The thing about pagan religions, including mystery cults, is that pagan religions evoke the natural forces of a particular place, and pagan gods belong to a particular locality. And so they're not transportable. If you leave Egypt, you leave the domain of Osiris and Ra, and Osiris and Ra can't do anything for you. If you wind up in Babylon you're under the domain of Marduk. Pagan gods are inherently local. But Christianity is monotheistic. It's based on the Jewish idea that there is a particular God that is bound not to a place, but to a people, and that has a active relationship of mutual benefit, um, protection by that God for you as a person in exchange for your devotion to that God. And so, we've already seen with the Jews that provides an immense boost in the strength of their identity, far beyond most pagan peoples. Christianity is the same. Christianity is a real threat to the Romanization, a real threat to the Roman identity. And for this reason, it is persecuted from the first. And early Christian history is a history of persevering through that persecution and making a virtue of it through the adoration of the martyrs who suffer under Roman oppression. This varies again from period to period, and so we see this sort of spike in particular principates. We have certain instances under Nero, and then it happens again under Domitian and so forth. And other times the Christians are tolerated and or ignored. But Christianity itself is on the Roman radar, and occasionally the subject of vicious Roman repercussions because of the nature of its relationship with its God, because it is a monotheistic religion that spreads beyond an ethnicity. Because even Judaism, the threat though it was restricted to the Jewish ethnicity. Christianity broke free of that and began apostatizing to all the other peoples once it outgrew its bonds to Judaism. And so therefore became a distinct rival to people identifying themselves simply as Roman and strengthening the Roman identity. And how that plays out in terms of the story of Christianity and the Romans, we'll be continuing to talk about over the next few weeks. For now, that's that.